Maid helps injured man. After an accident, unaware. He's a millionaire, and one day, something happened. The rain poured relentlessly, cascading down like a curtain over the Chicago streets. The city, alive with its usual chaos, seemed eerily subdued under the weight of the storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance and lightning illuminated the darkened skyline. For most, it was a night to stay inside, curled up with warm blankets and hot drinks. For Emily Carter, it was just another shift as a paramedic. The siren's wail echoed through the soaked streets, competing with the roar of the storm as Emily gripped the steering wheel of the ambulance. Beside her, her partner, Luis Martinez, relayed information through the radio. Single vehicle collision. Lakeshore Drive. Report says the car hydroplaned and hit the divider, Luis said, his voice calm but urgent. Emily nodded, her jaw tightening. Any updates on the driver? Unconscious. Passers-by called it in. Fire department's en route, but we'll get there first. Emily pushed the accelerator, her focus sharpening. Every second mattered. The rain blurred the windshield, but she didn't falter. She'd been through worse blizzards, heat waves, even the occasional tornado warning. Tonight, though, there was an edge to her nerves, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. As they approached the scene, the faint flicker of flames cut through the downpour. A mangled black sedan rested against the concrete divider, its hood crumpled like paper. Smoke and fire licked at the edges of the wreckage, defying the heavy rain. Nearby, a couple of bystanders waved frantically, their faces pale and wet with rain. Emily pulled the ambulance to a screeching halt and jumped out, her boots splashing into ankle-deep water. The acrid smell of gasoline and burning rubber hit her immediately. She grabbed her gear bag, shouting instructions to Luis as they approached the car. "Call for backup and check the perimeter," she said. "I'm going in." Luis nodded, his face grim, and moved to secure the area. The driver's side was crushed, the door warped and sealed shut. Emily moved quickly to the passenger side, peering through the shattered window. The interior was a chaotic mess of airbags and debris, and her heart clenched when she saw the man slumped over the steering wheel. He was unconscious, blood trailing down his forehead, his chest rising and falling faintly. His dark hair was matted with sweat and rain, and his suit, once undoubtedly sharp, was torn and stained. The flames crept closer to the engine, hissing and crackling ominously. "Hey!" Emily called out, her voice firm but edged with urgency. "Can you hear me?" No response. She tried the passenger door. It groaned, but didn't budge. Without hesitation, she grabbed her crowbar, wedging it between the door and the frame. Her muscles strained as she leveraged her weight against the tool, her breath fogging in the cold air. After what felt like an eternity, the door gave way with a screech. She climbed in, carefully navigating the shards of glass and twisted metal. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She checked his pulse, weak but steady, and began assessing his injuries. A fractured arm, likely a concussion, and possible internal trauma. The real danger, however, was the fire creeping closer. "Luis," she shouted, her voice cutting through the rain. "We need extraction tools now." Luis appeared moments later, carrying a hydraulic cutter. Together, they worked to free the man from the wreckage, their movements precise and practiced, despite the ticking clock. The flames roared louder, and Emily felt the heat biting at her back. Sweat mingled with rain on her forehead, but she didn't stop. Finally, with one last cut, the man slumped into her arms. Emily cradled him carefully, shielding his face from the rain as they carried him to the stretcher. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Emily caught a brief flicker of movement. His eyes fluttered open for the barest of moments, dark and unfocused. But they found hers. His gaze, filled with pain and vulnerability, locked onto her with an intensity that took her breath away. "It's you," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the storm. Emily blinked, startled, but before she could respond, his eyes rolled shut again. "Emily, we've got to go," Louis shouted, snapping her back to the moment. She climbed into the ambulance, securing the man as Louis slammed the doors shut. The siren wailed again as they sped toward the hospital, the fiery wreckage fading into the rain-soaked distance. By the time they reached the ER, the man was stable, but still unconscious. Emily briefed the trauma team as they whisked him away, her words quick and clinical. But as she watched the doors swing closed behind him, she felt an odd pang of something she couldn't quite name. "Good work tonight," Louise said, clapping her on the shoulder. "You saved his life." Emily nodded, her mind replaying the moment when their eyes had met. There had been something in that gaze, something that felt strangely familiar, despite the fact that she'd never seen him before. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. He was just another patient, another life saved. That was all, or so she told herself. As the storm raged on outside, Emily returned to the ambulance, ready for the next call. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder who he was, and why those two words, "It's you," echoed so loudly in her mind. The rain had stopped by the time Emily Carter returned home, but the chill of the storm lingered in the air. Her small apartment in the Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago was quiet, save for the soft hum of the radiator struggling to keep the space warm. She shrugged off her damp jacket, tossing it over the back of the couch, and sank into the worn cushions with a sigh. The day had been grueling, and the image of the man she had pulled from the wreckage haunted her thoughts. His dark eyes, clouded with pain but somehow piercing, flashed in her mind. She shook her head, trying to push the memory aside. It wasn't the first life she'd saved, and it wouldn't be the last. But something about him lingered, a faint thread pulling at her emotions. Her stomach growled, breaking her reverie. Emily crossed to the tiny kitchen and opened the fridge. The shelves were almost bare, a carton of eggs, a block of cheese, and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. She frowned and grabbed the peanut butter, spreading it on the last slice of bread before sitting down at the counter. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself. Years ago she had dreamed of becoming a doctor, her white coat a symbol of the difference she would make in the world. But life had other plans. Her father's medical bills after his sudden stroke had drained the family's savings, leaving Emily to shoulder the financial burden. She had taken a job as a paramedic to stay in the medical field while saving for medical school, but the dream felt further away with each passing day. She glanced at the stack of unopened bills on the counter, her chest tightening. Rent was due in a week, and her savings were dwindling. The thought of picking up extra shifts filled her with exhaustion, but she didn't see another option. Emily finished her meager dinner and pulled out her laptop. She opened a tab to research scholarship programs, her determination outweighing her weariness. No matter how hard it got, she couldn't give up. She wouldn't. Across town, in a private room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Daniel Grayson opened his eyes to the blinding glare of fluorescent lights. A dull ache radiated through his body, his head throbbing as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of monitors filled the room. His throat felt dry, and when he attempted to sit up, a sharp pain in his ribs forced him back down. A nurse, noticing his movement, hurried to his side. "Mr. Grayson, you're awake," she said, her tone both professional and relieved. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Daniel muttered, his voice raspy. The nurse smiled sympathetically. "You were in a car accident. You're lucky to be alive. A paramedic pulled you out just in time." The events of the crash came rushing back in fragmented flashes, the blinding rain, the loss of control, the crushing impact. But amidst the chaos, one image stood out, a woman's face framed by the glow of fire and rain. Her eyes, steady and determined, had been the last thing he saw before everything went black. "Who was she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who?" the nurse replied, adjusting the IV drip attached to his arm. "The paramedic," Daniel said, his gaze unfocused as he tried to piece together the memory. "The one who saved me." The nurse hesitated, clearly unsure. "I don't know her name, but I'm sure the fire department or EMT logs would have it. You should rest for now." Rest was the last thing on Daniel's mind. He closed his eyes, but instead of sleep, the image of his rescuer consumed his thoughts. There had been something unspoken in the moment their eyes met, something he couldn't explain, but felt compelled to understand. Emily's routine. The next day, Emily returned to work, her body weary, but her resolve intact. The station buzzed with activity as paramedics prepped ambulances, reviewed routes, and grabbed quick meals between calls. Emily was no stranger to the grind, but today, a strange energy hung in the air. Louise approached her as she finished restocking the supply cabinet. "You hear about the guy from last night? The car wreck?" she asked, snapping the lid on a box of gauze. "Yeah," Louise said, leaning against the door frame. "Turns out he's loaded. Daniel Grayson, CEO of Grayson Enterprises. The guy owns half the skyscrapers downtown." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Didn't look like a billionaire when I pulled him out of that wreck." Louise chuckled. "Guess money doesn't protect you from hydroplaning. Anyway, rumor is he's asking about you." Emily froze. "About me?" Louise nodded. "Wants to find out who saved him. The nurses said he's been asking non-stop since he woke up." Her stomach flipped, an uneasy mix of curiosity and apprehension. It wasn't uncommon for people to want to thank their rescuers, but something about the idea of a billionaire tracking her down felt complicated. Meanwhile, Daniel was already making calls from his hospital bed. Despite his injuries, his mind was sharp, and his connections gave him access to resources most people could only dream of. He reached out to his assistant, Carla, who arrived at the hospital within hours, armed with her laptop and an air of efficiency. "You want me to track down a paramedic?" Carla asked, raising an eyebrow as she typed on her keyboard. "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "She saved my life." "Okay," Carla said, her tone skeptical. "But why? You can send a generic thank you to the station." "It's not just about thanking her," Daniel said, his voice softening. "There's something I need to understand." Carla didn't press further. She had worked for Daniel long enough to know that when he set his mind to something, he wouldn't stop until he got answers. By the end of the day, Carla had narrowed down the list to one name: Emily Carter. "She's been a paramedic for a few years," Carla reported. "Lives in Logan Square. Looks like she's been working long hours, probably saving for something." Daniel stared at the name on the screen, a flicker of recognition sparking in his chest. "Emily," he said quietly, testing the name on his tongue. "I need to meet her." Carla hesitated. "Daniel, you just got out of surgery. You should be resting." "I'll rest when I've thanked her properly," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The first time Daniel approached Emily, she was taken off guard. It was at the station where he arrived unannounced, his presence impossible to ignore. His tailored coat and polished demeanor stood out among the chaos, and as he introduced himself, Emily felt a mix of surprise and unease. "I wanted to thank you," Daniel said, his voice earnest, "for saving my life." Emily crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "I was just doing my job." "Maybe," Daniel replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But that doesn't make it any less extraordinary." Their conversation was brief, but it left an impression on both of them. For Emily, it was a reminder of the impact she could have, even when the days felt endless. For Daniel, it was the beginning of something he couldn't quite define: a need to understand the woman who had risked her life for his. As the days passed, Emily returned to her routine, focusing on her patients and her dreams of medical school. She tried not to dwell on Daniel's visit, but the memory lingered. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself drawn to the idea of giving back, inspired by the strength and selflessness he had seen in Emily. Their lives, so different yet inexplicably connected, continued on separate paths. But fate had a way of weaving them together, pulling their threads closer with each passing day. The soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the gentle strains of a live jazz band filled the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel. Glittering chandeliers hung overhead, casting warm light onto the elegantly dressed guests mingling below. The annual Grayson Enterprises Gala was in full swing, an event that attracted Chicago's elite business leaders, philanthropists, and socialites alike. For Emily Carter, the setting felt worlds away from her usual life. Her modest black dress and simple heels contrasted sharply with the gowns and designer tuxedos that filled the room. She tugged at the bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit, and scanned the crowd for her sister, Sophia. Sophia had insisted Emily attend as her guest, using the promise of free champagne and hors d'oeuvres to lure her away from her usual Saturday night routine of studying and catching up on sleep. "You deserve a break," Sophia had said. "And besides, it'll be fun. Just pretend you belong and no one will notice." Emily wasn't so sure about the fun part, but she didn't want to disappoint her sister. She took a sip of champagne and tried to blend into the crowd. Across the room, Daniel Grayson stood near the edge of the ballroom, his sharp eyes scanning the gathering. His black tuxedo fit him perfectly, and his polished demeanor exuded the quiet authority of a man used to commanding attention. Yet tonight, his focus wasn't on his colleagues or the business deals being whispered over cocktails. He was looking for someone. He hadn't expected to find her here. When he first caught sight of Emily Carter stepping hesitantly into the room, it felt as though the rest of the crowd had faded into the background. There was no mistaking her the determined paramedic who had pulled him from the wreckage of his car. Her face, so familiar from that stormy night, was etched in his memory, but she didn't appear to recognize him. She moved through the room with the quiet self-assurance of someone trying not to stand out, and Daniel couldn't help but be intrigued. Who was she really? What had brought her to his company's gala? His assistant, Carla, had mentioned something about her sister working at Grayson Enterprises, but beyond that, Emily remained a mystery, and Daniel couldn't resist the pull to solve it. Emily had just helped herself to a small plate of hors d'oeuvres when she heard a voice behind her. Not a fan of crowded ballrooms either. She turned to see a man standing a few feet away, his tone light, but his expression warm. He was tall, with sharp features and striking dark eyes that seemed to hold a mix of curiosity and something she couldn't quite place. "I guess I'm not really the gala type," Emily replied, managing a small smile. "My sister works here, and she invited me." Daniel nodded, taking a step closer. "Then we're in the same boat. I usually avoid these events, but tonight, I'm glad I came." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, and Emily shifted under the intensity of it. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. "I'm Daniel, by the way," he said, extending a hand. "Emily," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. His grip was firm, but not overbearing. "It's nice to meet you, Emily," Daniel said, his lips curving into a faint smile. "So, what do you do when you're not surviving company galas?" Emily hesitated. She wasn't used to small talk, especially in a setting like this. "I'm a paramedic," she said finally. "It's not as glamorous as all this, but it's rewarding." Daniel's expression shifted, a flicker of admiration crossing his features. "A paramedic? That's impressive. I imagine it takes a lot of courage." Emily shrugged, brushing off the compliment. "It's just a job. Someone has to do it." "Maybe," Daniel said, his tone thoughtful. "But not everyone could." There was a sincerity in his voice that caught Emily off guard. Most people responded with platitudes or polite indifference when she mentioned her work, but Daniel seemed genuinely interested, as though he understood the weight of what she did. The conversation flowed more easily as the minutes passed. Daniel asked her about her most challenging moments as a paramedic, and Emily found herself sharing stories she rarely talked about. She spoke about the adrenaline rush of saving lives, the heartbreak of losing patients, and the quiet moments of humanity she witnessed every day. In return, Daniel shared glimpses of his own life, though he was careful to keep his identity as the CEO of Grayson Enterprises under wraps. He spoke about his love of architecture, his favorite spots in Chicago, and the sense of responsibility he felt toward the city. "It sounds like you care a lot about what you do," Emily said, tilting her head. "What is it that you do exactly?" Daniel hesitated for a split second before responding. "I'm in real estate and development. It keeps me busy, but I try to make time for the things that matter." Emily nodded, satisfied with his answer. She didn't press further. and Daniel felt a flicker of relief. He wasn't ready to tell her the full truth, not yet. He wanted her to know him as a person, not as the man she had saved or the CEO who might intimidate her. As the evening wore on, they found themselves standing near a quiet corner of the ballroom, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Emily felt strangely at ease with Daniel, as though she had known him for longer than just a few hours. There was something grounding about his presence, something she couldn't quite explain. When Sophia finally found her, Emily was reluctant to leave. She exchanged numbers with Daniel before following her sister out into the chilly night air. After the gala, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Her quiet strength and unassuming nature had left a deep impression on him, and he found himself wanting to know more. She was so different from the people he usually encountered, grounded, genuine, and refreshingly direct. He stared at his phone, debating whether to send her a message. Finally, he typed out a simple text. "Daniel, it was great meeting you tonight. Let me know if you'd like to grab coffee sometime." When Emily's response came an hour later, his heart lifted. "Emily, I'd like that. Let me know when." For Emily, the evening had been unexpected in the best way. Daniel had surprised her not just with his kindness, but with his ability to make her feel seen in a way few others did. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to him than he let on. She set her phone down and climbed into bed, her mind replaying their conversation. There was something about Daniel Grayson that felt both familiar and mysterious. She didn't know what it was, but she couldn't deny that she wanted to find out. As the days turned into weeks, their paths continued to intertwine. Daniel, determined to build a genuine connection, reached out to Emily with small gestures, a coffee date, a walk by the lake, or a text checking in after a long shift. Emily, hesitant but intrigued, found herself looking forward to his messages and their easy conversations. Neither of them knew where their story would lead, but both felt the quiet pull of something extraordinary taking shape. The crisp morning air carried the faint aroma of roasted coffee as Emily stepped into the small cafe nestled on a quiet corner in Lincoln Park. The space buzzed with soft conversation and the clatter of cups, offering a cozy refuge from the bustling city outside. Emily glanced around and spotted Daniel at a corner table, his phone resting face down beside a steaming cup of black coffee. He looked up as she approached, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Emily," he said, standing to greet her, "I'm glad you could make it." "Thanks for inviting me," she replied, slipping into the chair across from him. She set her bag down and let the warmth of the room thaw her fingers. "It's nice to have a reason to slow down for once." Daniel chuckled. "Something tells me you don't slow down very often." She smirked. "Occupational hazard. Paramedics don't exactly get leisurely coffee breaks." "Well, I'd say you've earned this one," he said, signaling to a barista. "What can I get you?" Emily ordered her favorite latte, and as they settled into their conversation, the initial formality between them began to fade. Their talks meandered effortlessly from light-hearted topics, Daniel's aversion to pineapple on pizza, Emily's disastrous attempts at gardening, to deeper, more personal reflections. "So," Daniel asked, leaning forward slightly, "what made you want to become a paramedic?" Emily hesitated, the question tugging at a thread of vulnerability she wasn't used to sharing. "It wasn't the original plan," she admitted, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger. "I always wanted to be a doctor. Growing up, that was the dream. What happened?" Daniel's voice was gentle, genuinely curious. She sighed. "Life happened. My dad had a stroke when I was in college. The medical bills piled up, and I had to leave school to help my family. Becoming a paramedic was a way to stay in the medical field while still supporting them." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Emily admitted, her voice softening. "But I don't regret it. I've learned so much, and I still get to make a difference. I'm just not where I thought I'd be by now." There was a wistfulness in her tone that tugged at Daniel's chest. He wanted to tell her about the scholarship he had anonymously funded, how he had come across her application by sheer chance and been moved by her story. But he held back. How could he explain without making it seem like he'd invaded her life? "And what about now?" he asked, shifting the focus back to her. "Are you still chasing that dream?" Emily nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I am. I've been taking night classes to finish my degree, and I applied for a few scholarships. It's slow progress, but I'm getting there." Daniel smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's incredible, Emily. It takes a lot of courage to keep going." She shrugged, downplaying his praise. "What about you? What drives you?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I guess I'm driven by the idea of creating something lasting, something that makes a difference. Whether it's through my work or the people I meet, I want to leave things better than I found them." It was a polished answer, but it wasn't untrue. Still, a pang of guilt gnawed at him. He wasn't lying exactly, but he wasn't being completely honest either. The weight of the secret he carried, the scholarship, the car wreck, the truth about who he was, pressed heavier with every passing day. Over the next few weeks, their coffee dates became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they met at the same cafe, other times they ventured to new spots, exploring different corners of the city together. Daniel was captivated by Emily's strength and selflessness, while Emily found herself drawn to his quiet confidence and thoughtful nature. One afternoon, as they strolled through Millennium Park, Daniel surprised her with a question. "What's something you've always wanted to do but never had the chance to?" Emily laughed, caught off guard. "I don't know. I guess I've always wanted to travel. I've never been out of the country." "Where would you go?" he pressed, his tone curious. "Anywhere with a beach," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Someplace warm and quiet, where I can just sit and do nothing for a change." Daniel smiled, imagining her on a sun-drenched shoreline, far from the chaos of her everyday life. "Sounds perfect. You should do it someday." "Maybe," she said, a touch of skepticism in her voice, "if I can ever afford the time or the money." "Don't let that stop you," he said earnestly. "Life's too short to put off the things that make you happy." Emily glanced at him, surprised by the intensity of his words. "You sound like you speak from experience." Daniel's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Let's just say I've learned to prioritize what matters." Despite the joy their growing connection brought him, Daniel couldn't shake the unease building inside him. Every time they met, every time she shared a piece of herself with him, he felt the weight of his secret grow heavier. He wanted to tell her the truth about the scholarship, about the accident, about the lengths he had gone to learn more about her. But how could he? What if she felt betrayed, as though he had been manipulating her life from the shadows? He had wanted to help her, not complicate things. Yet now he feared the very thing that had brought them together could tear them apart. For Emily, the past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions. She couldn't deny the connection she felt with Daniel, but there was a part of her that remained cautious. He was kind, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in her dreams and struggles. But there were moments, small pauses in his responses, a flicker of something in his eyes that made her wonder if he was holding back. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, she replayed their conversations in her mind. There was so much about him she didn't know. His work, his background, it all felt vaguely defined, as though he was deliberately keeping her at arm's length. She wasn't sure if it was her own insecurities or a genuine red flag, but the doubt gnawed at her. Their next meeting was quieter than usual, both of them lost in their own thoughts. They sat at a small table by the window, watching the rain drizzle against the glass. Emily stirred her tea absent-mindedly, while Daniel fiddled with the cuff of his sleeve. "Daniel," Emily said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, meeting her gaze. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. "Why do you want to spend time with me?" Daniel blinked, surprised by the directness of her question. He hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "Because you're remarkable," he said finally, "and I want to know you better." His answer was honest, but Emily sensed there was more beneath the surface. She studied him for a moment, searching his face for answers. But whatever secrets he carried, he wasn't ready to share them yet. She nodded, letting the moment pass, but the questions lingered in her mind. And for Daniel, the realization that he couldn't keep his secret forever loomed closer with every passing day. The sleek modern lobby of Grayson Enterprises buzzed with quiet activity as Emily followed her sister, Sophia, toward the elevators. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Chicago's skyline, and the faint hum of polite conversation and clicking heels filled the air. Sophia had invited Emily for lunch, hoping to spend some quality time together amid their busy schedules. Emily appreciated the gesture, but being in a corporate environment like this always made her feel slightly out of place. The clean lines and sharp suits were a far cry from the chaos of an ambulance and the rumble of city streets. "You're going to love the rooftop cafe," Sophia said, pressing the elevator button. "It's quiet, the food's great, and the view is unbeatable." Emily nodded, her thoughts drifting. She couldn't help but wonder if she might run into Daniel. Though she didn't know much about his work, she knew he operated in this sphere polished, powerful, and high stakes. But she quickly dismissed the thought. What were the odds? As the elevator doors opened, Sophia led her down a hallway lined with glass offices. They passed groups of employees huddled in meeting rooms, their voices muffled by the thick glass. Emily glanced around, curious but feeling like an outsider in this world. "Just a quick stop to grab my notes," Sophia said, leading her to a desk near the corner. "I'll be 2 minutes." Emily waited, leaning against a nearby column and observing the bustle around her. That's when she heard it, a snippet of a conversation that froze her in place. 2 employees stood just around the corner, their voices low but audible. Emily wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the mention of her name stopped her cold. "I still can't believe Daniel Grayson funded that scholarship anonymously," one of them said. "He must have really been moved by her story." "Yeah," the other replied. "I mean, it's a generous move, but doesn't it seem a little involved? Sponsoring the scholarship, keeping tabs on her progress," the first voice cut in. "It's just who he is, I guess. He's always been a little unorthodox about philanthropy, but still, helping someone like that without her even knowing, that's next level." Emily's chest tightened, her mind racing. Daniel? Scholarship? Her thoughts were a jumble of disbelief and dawning realization. Could they be talking about her? The pieces clicked together with jarring clarity. The financial aid she had received for her medical studies, the anonymous benefactor, Daniel's mysterious demeanor and sudden presence in her life. Her breath quickened, anger rising in her chest. It wasn't just the scholarship he had known about her struggles, her dreams, and her vulnerabilities. And yet he had let her open up to him without ever revealing the truth. "Emily." Sophia's voice pulled her back to the present. She turned to see her sister watching her with a puzzled expression. "You okay?" Yeah, I just need a minute," Emily said, forcing a tight smile. "Can we reschedule lunch?" Sophia frowned. "Are you sure? What happened?" "I'll explain later," Emily said, already heading toward the elevators. "I just need to go." It didn't take long for Emily to find Daniel. She texted him, asking to meet, and he responded quickly, suggesting a quiet park near Lincoln Park Zoo. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the green space, and the distant sound of children playing filled the air. But Emily felt none of the serenity the setting offered. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, his expression softening when he saw her. "Emily," he said, his voice warm, "I wasn't expecting to see you today. What's going on?" Her jaw tightened as she faced him, her emotions boiling just beneath the surface. "I heard about the scholarship, Daniel." He froze, his confident demeanor faltering. You did?" "Yes," she said, crossing her arms. "I overheard your employees talking about how you funded my scholarship anonymously." "Is it true?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emily, just answer me," she snapped. "Did you fund my scholarship?" "Yes," he admitted after a beat, his voice low. "I did." Her chest tightened, a mix of anger and betrayal surging through her. "Why? Why didn't you tell me? You knew how much it meant to me, and you just what? Decided to swoop in and fix things without telling me?" "It wasn't like that," Daniel said, his tone pleading. "I read your application. Your story moved me, Emily. I wanted to help, but I didn't want you to feel obligated. She interrupted, her voice rising. "You think this is about feeling obligated? You interfered in my life, Daniel. You let me think I earned that scholarship on my own, and all the while you were sitting there pretending to just be some guy getting to know me." "I wasn't pretending," he said, his voice firm. "Everything I've said to you, everything I've done, it's real, Emily. I care about you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "You should have told me from the beginning." "I didn't know how," Daniel admitted, his voice softening. "I thought if I told you, it would change the way you saw me. I didn't want that." "Well, congratulations," Emily said bitterly. "It's definitely changed the way I see you." Daniel stepped closer, his expression pained. "Emily, please. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to help. You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice trembling. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove that I can make it on my own. And now, everything I've worked for, it feels like a lie." "It's not a lie," he insisted. "You've earned everything you've achieved. The scholarship was just a way to give you a chance." She shook her head, her heart breaking even as anger coursed through her. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth, Emily," he started, but she held up a hand, cutting him off. "I can't do this," she said, stepping back. "I thought I could trust you, but now I don't know what's real anymore." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet park. Daniel stood frozen, his heart sinking as he watched her go. Emily returned to her apartment, her emotions a storm of anger, sadness, and confusion. She replayed the conversation in her mind, questioning everything she had felt for Daniel. She had let herself believe in him, in their connection, and now it all felt tainted. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his office, staring at his phone. He wanted to call her, to explain himself better, but he knew she needed time. He had made a mistake born out of good intentions, but a mistake nonetheless. Now, he could only hope that she would find it in her heart to forgive him. The weeks after Emily's confrontation with Daniel were a blur of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal. They came in waves, sometimes catching her off guard in the quiet moments when she thought she had finally moved on. But beneath the turmoil was a growing resolve. If there was one thing Emily Carter knew how to do, it was push forward. Sitting at her desk in her tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of textbooks and scribbled notes, Emily leaned into her medical studies with renewed determination. The scholarship may have come from Daniel, but her place in medical school was hers. Every late-night study session, every test she aced, every moment she spent poring over anatomy diagrams, those were hers alone. The clock on her wall ticked steadily as she flipped through her flashcards, her lips moving as she whispered terms to herself. She paused briefly, her gaze drifting to the window. The city lights twinkled against the inky darkness, a reminder of the world outside her small, cluttered space. A part of her ached to reach for her phone, to text Daniel, to tell him about the new study techniques she'd discovered or the small victories of her day. But she stopped herself. That part of her life was over, or so she told herself. The demands of medical school were relentless. Emily spent her days in lectures and her nights in the library, her highlighters bleeding neon trails across her notes. Her weekends were filled with clinical rotations, shadowing doctors and nurses in bustling hospital wards. The adrenaline rush of learning on the job was thrilling, but it also reminded her of her time as a paramedic. The chaos of the ER, the tension of life-or-death moments, it all felt familiar, yet distant. One afternoon, during a grueling clinical skills exam, Emily felt the weight of her decision to go it alone. As she practiced intubation on a dummy under the watchful eye of her instructor, her hands trembled slightly, the pressure of perfection gnawing at her nerves. "You're doing fine," her instructor said gently. "Take a breath, steady your hands." Emily nodded, swallowing her frustration. She completed the task and exhaled slowly, a small sense of relief washing over her. But the moment lingered in her mind, a reminder of how much was at stake. She couldn't afford to falter, not now, not ever. Despite the challenges, Emily began to rediscover herself. She carved out small pockets of time for joy, a quick jog along the lakefront, a cup of coffee at her favorite cafe, a long overdue call with her sister. These moments, though fleeting, grounded her. Sophia often checked in, offering a mix of encouragement and concern. "You're working yourself too hard," she said during one of their calls. "You need to take a break." "I can't," Emily replied, her tone firm but not unkind. "This is my chance, Sophia. I can't waste it." Sophia sighed, but she understood. Emily had always been fiercely independent, a trait that sometimes veered into stubbornness. Still, she admired her sister's resilience. Across the city, Daniel Grayson sat in his office at Grayson Enterprises, staring at a proposal on his desk. The sleek, glass-walled space that had once felt like a throne now felt like a cage. Every corner of the room seemed to echo with reminders of his mistakes. The confrontation with Emily had left a mark on him, one he couldn't ignore. After weeks of sleepless nights and endless self-reflection, Daniel made a decision. He called his assistant, Carla, into his office. "I'm stepping down," he said, his voice steady but resolute. Carla blinked, taken aback. "Stepping down?" "From the CEO role. For now," Daniel clarified. "I need time to figure things out. I'll stay involved as a board member, but I can't do this right now." Carla hesitated, searching his face for signs of doubt, but found none. "I'll start the paperwork," she said finally. Daniel exhaled, the weight of the decision lifting slightly. He wasn't running away, he was stepping aside to focus on something that had been missing from his life for far too long: purpose. In the weeks that followed, Daniel threw himself into philanthropic work, channeling his energy into causes that resonated deeply with him. He partnered with organizations focused on healthcare access, education, and housing initiatives, using his wealth and influence to make tangible changes in people's lives. One of his first projects was a scholarship fund for aspiring healthcare professionals, inspired by Emily's journey. Unlike before, this time Daniel was open about his involvement. He wanted to ensure that recipients knew the support came with no strings attached, no hidden agendas. At a small fundraising gala, Daniel stood before a modest crowd, addressing them with uncharacteristic humility. "We all have the power to make a difference," he said. "Sometimes it takes meeting someone extraordinary to remind us of that. This fund is about giving people the opportunity to change their lives and the lives of others, just as they've inspired me." As the room applauded, Daniel felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. It didn't erase the mistakes he had made, but it was a step toward becoming the man he wanted to be. One afternoon, as Emily exited the hospital after a long shift, she spotted a flyer on the community board by the entrance. It advertised a new scholarship fund for healthcare students, sponsored by none other than Daniel Grayson. She stared at the flyer, her emotions a mix of surprise, admiration, and the faintest flicker of frustration. He hadn't stopped trying to make a difference, not just for her, but for countless others. It was the kind of work that aligned with everything she believed in, yet it felt bittersweet knowing their paths had diverged. Later that evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing notes, her mind wandered back to Daniel. Despite the pain of their parting, she couldn't deny the impact he had left on her. He had shown her that change was possible, even for someone as seemingly untouchable as a powerful CEO, and though she wasn't ready to forgive him completely, a part of her hoped that his journey would bring him peace. Emily's final year of medical school came into sharper focus as she approached each challenge with renewed vigor. She earned the respect of her peers and mentors, her name often mentioned in hushed admiration for her resilience and dedication. One evening, as she packed up her books in the campus library, she glanced at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her looked tired, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had fought for this moment, and it was hers. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Cultural Center was alive with energy, Soft classical music played in the background as well-dressed guests mingled, sipping champagne and discussing the night's cause, expanding healthcare access for underprivileged communities. The walls shimmered with elegant golden accents, and the dome above cast a warm, ethereal glow over the room. Emily Carter stood near the entrance, adjusting the strap of her midnight blue dress. It had been over a year since she last saw Daniel Grayson, and while she hadn't expected to cross paths with him tonight, she wasn't entirely surprised. The event, hosted by his foundation, bore his signature touch, thoughtful, ambitious, and deeply impactful. She had received the invitation through her medical school's community outreach program. At first, she hesitated to attend, but her curiosity about the man Daniel had become and the work he was doing won out. Now, as she stepped further into the crowd, her nerves buzzed with anticipation. Across the room, Daniel Grayson stood by a large display showcasing the Foundation's recent projects. Dressed in a simple yet perfectly tailored tuxedo, he spoke to a group of donors, his tone animated but composed. His passion for the cause was evident, and the warmth in his demeanor made him approachable despite his polished exterior. As he concluded his conversation, his eyes scanned the room, and then he saw her. For a moment, the world seemed to quiet. Emily, radiant in her blue dress, stood near a table, her attention focused on a program pamphlet. Daniel's heart raced. He hadn't expected to see her here, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Gathering his courage, he made his way toward her, weaving through the crowd. When he was just a few steps away, Emily looked up, her gaze meeting his. Her expression shifted surprise, hesitation, and something unreadable flickered across her face. "Emily," he said softly, stopping in front of her, "it's good to see you." "Daniel," she replied, her voice calm but guarded, "I wasn't expecting to see you tonight." He gestured toward the display behind him. "I didn't realize you'd be attending, but I'm glad you're here. This event, this cause, it's important to me. And I know it's something you care about too." Emily nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around the stem of her champagne flute. "It's impressive, what you've built. The work you're doing, it's making a real difference." Her words were sincere, but there was a distance in her tone that stung. Daniel knew he had to address the elephant in the room. "Emily," he began, his voice quieter, "I owe you an apology." "A real one." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm sorry for how I handled things," he continued, "for not telling you the truth about the scholarship, about everything. At the time, I thought I was protecting you, or maybe just protecting myself. But I realize now that I was wrong. You deserved honesty from the beginning." Emily stayed silent, her expression unreadable, so he pressed on. "When I funded that scholarship, it wasn't about control or manipulation," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I read your story, and I was moved by your determination and your strength. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how to do it without crossing a line. And then when I met you—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "When I met you, everything changed. I saw how incredible you were, how much you'd already achieved on your own. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd think less of me or worse, that I'd lose the chance to know you." Emily's chest tightened as she listened. His words were raw, and the vulnerability in his voice was undeniable. She had spent so long grappling with her feelings about him, anger, hurt, and deep down a lingering sense of affection she had tried to suppress. Now, standing before him, she couldn't ignore the sincerity in his eyes. "I was angry," she admitted, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Angry because I felt like you'd taken away my agency, like I couldn't trust what was real anymore. But more than that, I was hurt. I let myself care about you, and it felt like you'd been keeping secrets from me the whole time." Daniel nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand why you felt that way, and I'll carry the regret of that for a long time. But I need you to know that my intentions were never to hurt you. I cared about you then, and I still care about you now." Her breath hitched slightly at his words, but she held his gaze. "You've changed," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I have," Daniel said, his tone firm, "because of you. You showed me what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself, to lead with authenticity and heart. I've tried to live up to that, to become someone worthy of the trust I broke." The air between them grew quiet, the hum of the gala fading into the background. Emily searched her feelings, the anger and betrayal that had once consumed her, now softened by the passage of time and the man standing before her. She could see the changes in him, not just in his words, but in his actions, in the way he carried himself. "I can't undo the past," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But if there's any way I can earn back your trust, I'll do whatever it takes." Emily took a deep breath, her emotions swirling. Forgiveness wasn't easy, it never was, but holding on to anger had only weighed her down. And standing here, seeing the man Daniel had become, she realized that he had already taken steps to make amends. "I forgive you," she said finally, her voice steady. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope breaking through his guarded expression. "You do?" She nodded. "But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. Trust takes time, Daniel. I'll take whatever time you're willing to give me," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Emily." Truly, as the night wore on, they found themselves sitting at a small table in a quieter corner of the ballroom. Their conversation shifted from the heavy emotions of the past to lighter topics, the work Daniel was doing through his foundation, Emily's upcoming clinical rotations, and their shared love of helping others. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt a sense of ease around him. There was no pressure, no pretense, just two people reconnecting, step by step. As the event wound down, Daniel walked Emily to the entrance. The cool night air greeted them as they stepped outside, the sounds of the city bustling around them. "Would you let me take you to dinner sometime?" Daniel asked, his voice tentative but hopeful. Emily smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. "One dinner," she said, teasing lightly. "We'll see where it goes from there." Daniel chuckled, his relief palpable. "I'll take it." As she walked away, Emily felt a weight lift from her chest. Forgiving Daniel didn't erase the past, but it gave them a chance to write a new chapter, one built on honesty, respect, and the promise of something greater. Emily agreed to meet Daniel for a quiet dinner, her first cautious step toward rebuilding their connection. They talked openly, Daniel expressing his admiration for her resilience and apologizing again for his mistakes. Emily admitted that while his actions had hurt her, they had also pushed her to grow. The evening ended on a hopeful note, marking the beginning of something new between them. Months later, Emily graduated from medical school, surrounded by her classmates and family. As she crossed the stage to accept her diploma, she spotted Daniel in the crowd. His quiet presence was a reminder of the support he had offered during her most challenging times. The pride in his eyes made her heart swell, though she knew her achievements were her own. Emily dove into her residency with determination, embracing the long hours and grueling challenges of hospital life. Meanwhile, Daniel split his time between running Grayson Enterprises and expanding his philanthropic work. Though their schedules were hectic, they made time for each other, quick coffee dates, late-night conversations, and small gestures of love that deepened their bond. Their relationship grew stronger through acts of quiet care. When Emily faced a tough day, Daniel was there with her favorite meal and an open ear. When Daniel encountered setbacks in his foundation work, Emily reminded him of the lives he was changing. They supported each other, not as saviors, but as equals who understood the weight of their respective worlds. One spring evening at a fundraising gala, Emily and Daniel stood together, watching the city skyline. The event celebrated their shared commitment to making a difference, a reflection of how far they had come individually and together. "This is what it's all about," Emily said, smiling. "Helping people, making a difference, and doing it together." Daniel replied, raising his glass in a quiet toast. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was built on mutual growth, trust, and a shared purpose. Together, they proved that love could flourish when rooted in authenticity and respect. And so, what began as a selfless act on a rainy night turned into a story of transformation, love, and second chances. Emily and Daniel proved that even the most unexpected encounters can change our lives in ways we could never imagine. Their journey reminds us of the power of courage, resilience, and authenticity. It's not just about saving someone's life, it's about how that moment can shape both of you forever. If this story inspired you, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a good twist of fate, and hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss a single one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.